So Tess, great to have you at New Video Frontiers.
Nice to be here.
So you've been, last year we did this with Jamie West and we decided to do an exit interview, not because he's retiring, and I should stress that Tess isn't retiring and will continue her work with the ASA. But it's a way to sort of pay some respect to their sort of exceptional contribution towards the industry. I think you've been a trailblazer for women in the industry. You've been a vocal and highly entertaining defender of the TV industry at our events over the years. I think most people will know you and associate you with Thinkbox. I think people have been around the industry longer. You had plenty of high profile before that. So could you just tell us a little bit about your career to date coming up to Thinkbox?
Okay, Vinny. Well, I actually started in advertising in 1977, can you believe?
Year I was born.
Completely by accident. Didn't know what I was getting into. I do think I arrived as a temporary filing clerk at ATV, having worked in theatre and education for a while. And it wasn't until about the mid-80s, I didn't really think I liked advertising very much or approved of it even, because I was a classic hippie. But I sort of got moved from filing into advertising sales at ATV, got on very quickly, moved to different TV companies, ended up being an ITV sales director in the late 80s, which was, I wasn't the first woman actually, but the first woman was somebody I worked for, but she only lasted 9 months before she married somebody, went off to Antigua. So I think I was the first probably fully functioning female ITV sales director. And then I decided it was a bit boring really, and that I probably ought to go off and learn how to do this advertising media thing properly. So I joined my friends, Patterson, Horswell and Durden at PhD, which had been set up in 1990, a small independent media agency founded with the model, the exact opposite, if you like, of Zenith, which was founded at the same time. Zenith was founded around size and volume and leverage. PhD's principle was about thinking and planning and strategy, and that appealed to me hugely. And so I arrived in 92 and I spent 13 years at PhD learning about all media, doing different directorships. For 3 years, I was in charge of their internet media division. We were the first media agency to install a search team, for instance. And for a while I ran Drum, so content and sponsorships. So it was an absolutely brilliant and fun thing to do. I ended up as the chair of the PhD group in the UK. And in my 50s by now, I was thinking I probably ought to retire and just bugger off and let other people run it. When I got a call from the TV industry, I think by then the IAB was 10 years old. And I had been one of the people from media agencies nagging them saying, why don't you counter this nonsense that's, I've just seen Google write a report, it's full of nonsense. And why isn't anybody in the TV industry, rebutting this or coming up with the facts? Anyway, finally they rang me and said, you're such a pain in the ass, would you like to come and do it? And to be honest, a lot of people thought I was mad. Why would I take on this basket case that was TV? But because I cared enormously about it, it's not the only medium I care about. I care about all sorts of things. But I thought it was probably the most misrepresented medium at that time, and had an enormously important and positive role commercially and culturally. And it needed a champion. And so, you can never do more than at the very start of this thing, going around all the TV companies saying, you've got to give me quite a few million quid or I'm not going to do it. And you've got to let me do it like this, or you can fire me if I don't produce any results. And they were absolutely brilliant and came up with the money and have been hugely supportive ever since. And so that's 14 and a half years ago now. So I finally decided, I can honestly say the Thinkbox team is the best in the world of any organization of its type. It's not just bullshit. They are absolutely brilliant and much admired around the world. And there have been Thinkbox-like organizations set up around the world, even in the States now, that in Canada and Australia and New Zealand, South Africa. And we have also been the driving force behind something called the Global TV Group. So with EGTA, the European group that represents TV companies, being a big participant and a big driver of it. But it's wonderful to see the global TV industry get together, because they need to act globally in the face of very large global competition.
Yeah.
So that's it. So I'm retiring at the end of the year, but I will spend another 3 years at the ASA on the council, trying to make ads better and better regulated.
Yeah, I was mentioned to Lindsay on our when we did our podcast together that I often hear people, particularly from the US, speaking very enviously about Thinkbox and the data you put out, the way you sort of argue TV's case. I think a lot of the people in the US, I know they do have equivalents, but they do feel that Thinkbox is.
I think when we set up, they had something called the TVB, the TV Bureau, and the CAB, which is the Cable Advertising Bureau. So unfortunately, they spent a lot of time just fighting against each other when advertisers don't think of cable versus, free to air. Consumers might, but for an advertising decision, really, you need to collaborate. And so they have finally come together and produced something called the Video Advertising Bureau in the States. And Sean Cunningham, who runs that. I wish they hadn't called it the Video Advertising Bureau, but never mind. They mean TV. They mean professionally made video content. So we're all getting our act together.
So as you already mentioned, over the years, Thinkbox has been no stranger to a bit of argy-bargy with the tech companies and the social networks, YouTube, I think particularly over the years. I mean, how would you describe that relationship? Has it evolved at all over the years, or do you feel that there's an ongoing tension there?
I think we have a sort of zero tolerance policy in terms of people spreading false or fake news, if you like, post-truth TV. And Google 10 years ago was probably a big source of it. I have to say, I think Google is much reformed in that sense. I don't think they put out a lot of bullshit. And also, people liked to characterize me particularly, but Thinkbox as being anti-internet, which is so far from the truth. We are passionate believers in the internet as a technology. It's a wonderful, wondrous, transforming technology. We just don't like it to be abused, and we just don't like people, any company, to say that they sort of own it, they have the rights to it. I think even I look back at some of the things I said in 2006 when I joined Thinkbox or set up Thinkbox. And I'm pleased to say I said back then, please can we stop this internet versus TV nonsense? They're not equivalents. The internet is a technology, and it could be and will be increasingly a distribution technology for TV. So, stop comparing them. Actually, internet plus TV will be amazing. And TV advertising plus various forms of internet media, like search, like email, like social media, are a very powerful combination. And we've done various research projects with, say, the IAB, with Twitter. So it's very wrong to characterize Thinkbox as anti-internet. But we like driving, but we don't like drunk driving. So that's all. So I think we're very happy. I am very happy, and Lindsay too, to get on a stage and tell it like it is. And I think still, although I see this week that Facebook has decided to remove Holocaust deniers, you think, what took you so long? But there are quite a lot of other harms out there. I think what we find pretty hard to take in the TV world, when every bit of content is not only vetted before it goes out on air or is streamed, it is also paid for. And somehow we find it difficult that some social media companies find that very hard to do. And and I need to be careful in terms of my ASA role, but I think we would, even if they aren't prepared to vet all content, and they would say they do vet some content, they have various AI, machine learning techniques that spot various things, but it seems to me a lot of bad content gets through and does a lot of harm before it gets removed. But when it comes to advertising, I absolutely can't understand why advertising in social media platforms can't be pre-vetted, because it's being paid for. There's a sum of money there that they can, you know, help to pay for this process. It's the cost of doing good business, in my opinion. So yes, we still would probably have a go at them about that, but things are getting a lot better. I think YouTube is miles better than it was. I've been watching a fair bit of YouTube on my 65-inch television screen during lockdown. There's a lot of good TV on YouTube. Also a lot of other stuff that I wouldn't want to watch. So TV will use that platform and other platforms as it always has, to be honest.
So looking back over the years, what would you regard as your proudest professional achievement? I'm hoping that there's a story about a bar fight with a Google executive, but you might want to go for something more noble.
Well, I don't know. I suppose I don't think of my career like that. I am very proud of having set up Thinkbox. I think that was, in terms of me individually making something happen, I suppose I'm proud of deciding to do it in my mid-50s, if you like, because one could easily have just sloped off to the Chilterns and grown more cabbages. So it took a lot, and getting the TV industry behind us, getting the money, you know, was a considerable feat. And you know, it takes a while before it shows any results, but they stayed with us. And now I like to think they wouldn't ever dream of not supporting something like Thinkbox. And I also, I mean, in 2018, I got a medal. I'm not really into medals and honours and things like that, but I was very, very happy to receive a medal from the Advertising Association called the Macintosh Medal, which is the highest honour that the advertising industry awards. And it's not just for professional, it's for your personal contribution. So I like to think I've been a good advertising citizen, if you like, doing various things beyond my day job. So.
Yeah. And more interestingly, what do you regret? Well, what would you have done differently if you could do it all over again?
I suppose I spent 9 years not really know what the fuck I was doing, not really learning properly, thinking I was going to go off and go back and be an actress or whatever. So probably learning more, but also at a much earlier age, not wanting to be liked so much. I think that's a real trap for people, possibly more women than men, is just wanting to be liked. It's only when I got into my hard-boiled 40s, 50s, I thought, oh, do you know what? I don't give a damn. I'm just going to say it anyway. So I spent too long trying to be liked, and I think a lot of people do that.
So you served, I mean, you mentioned about being a sales director. I mean, I think even the stories I've heard about, you know, the culture, the sales culture often within the TV world and within the national press, even in the 2000s, it could be an exceptionally macho, aggressive, often sometimes bullying atmosphere. What was your experience of it as being a female sales director, and you know, what was it like that? Was it elbows out?
I think it was quite a masculine culture. Maybe I was just lucky that I worked for, as I say, I worked for Harry Turner at Westwood Television, who had promoted a female sales director, and Craig himself. And in terms of, I was never one of the boys. I never played golf. I didn't drink a lot. But equally, I wasn't sort of girly, whatever that means. Obviously, I wasn't very girly. I was just sort of, I don't know, I didn't think too hard about it. I didn't do any bullying, I don't think. One of the things I do regret is I definitely saw sexual harassment take place and didn't speak up enough. That, you know, before I got brave enough to be unliked. I wish I'd been prepared to be disliked back then and support and going to help people I saw being groped or whatever, strong-armed into hotel rooms and whatever. So I was very pleased in 2017 to start the industry's initiative called Time To, which you might have heard about.
Yes, have you?
To combat sexual harassment.
Yeah.
And it's still terrifyingly prevalent. Even, you know, it's a collaboration between the Advertising Association, NABS, and WACL. And they do regular studies, sort of sweeps to see what's happening. And I'm afraid to say it's happening as much, perhaps not quite as much as it did. So I think there's been some fantastic communications and training initiatives to try and help companies combat that. There's a lot for companies to do, isn't there, with diversity and inclusion, but sexual harassment absolutely has to be part of good management. And it's mainly women who suffer it, but not entirely. Some men get sexually harassed by women and men, and we can't let it happen. It's so humiliating. It absolutely destroys people's.
Well, Tess, it's a slight shame that we're not doing this at King's Place, because I know that there would be a massive roar and a huge round of applause for you and everything that you've achieved at Thinkbox. But thanks so much for taking the time to do this online.
My great pleasure, Vinny.
Cheers.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into this session. Welcome to Owning Your Change on Racial Diversity and How Can CEOs Do More. I am Belinda Smith. I'm not the CEO on the panel. I am the Global Diversity Ambassador for WFA. I was formerly the head of global media for Electronic Arts. And today we're going to have a really good conversation, unmoderated. It will be me and Dominic Joseph on the line. He is the CEO of Captify. Dominic?
Hi Belinda.
Hey,
Great
how's
to
it
be
going?
here. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I think it's much earlier on my side of the world than yours, so hopefully the sun comes up while we're in the middle of this conversation. All right. Well, I know we just wanted to kind of have a back and forth, a little bit of an unmoderated chat. I will hand it over to the CEO to kick off.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously we've had an eventful year this year and an awful lot going on, and it's a pleasure to meet you. And considering your involvement in a few different things, and it'd be great to maybe get some background on what you've been doing and the work that you've been doing with the WFA.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it has been a year. It feels like it's been a couple of years smashed into one at this point. So again, I was formerly at EA. I led their global media team and then was head of marketing intelligence. And in that role, I was actually on the executive committee for the WFA. The WFA is the World Federation of Advertisers. And what we did a couple of years back is the WFA invited me to be involved in their Better Marketing session, which is kind of a thought series that they have during Global Marketer Week on how to make marketing better. And that's where I first tackled the issue of all things diversity through the work that we do as marketers. And not only how important it is to make impactful creative that reflects the world around us, but also thinking about enabling your organization to get to creative like that relies on you being an inclusive workplace that is diverse internally as well. So we've been doing that programming for a couple years. Again, I left my job in March, which was just in time for the apocalypse, it turns out. But since then, I've continued to work with the WFA. Me and my co-diversity ambassador, Jerry Dakin at GSK, lead the WFA Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. And that's a coming together of not only WFA member brands, but we also have some agencies and some national association committees that are in that group as well. And again, we're really working on the two tracks of diversifying the output, which could be advertising, creative, products that you make, services that you offer, what the website looks like, et cetera. And then diversifying, not really diversifying internally, but we really try to focus on inclusion and making workplaces safe for everyone before you really try to target specific populations to kind of balance out the demographic makeup on your teams. So I've been doing that. I've been doing a little consulting here and there. And yeah, it's just been a wild 6 months.
Yeah. So what have been your feelings about everything that's happened this year?
Well, we only have 20 minutes, so it's been weird. It's been a weird, I think something that has been different is people at least acknowledging that this isn't a new issue, which I'm very grateful for, because I feel like every time this issue comes up, we tackle it as if it's brand new, and that's a little frustrating. So I think the acknowledgement of where we have been really as a society and certainly as an industry up until this point, like I think people are starting to put two and two together, that we've had chief diversity officers for a while, but we still have this just gaping problem. So it's been interesting to watch the conversation evolve. I've been really encouraged by that. It's also been weird to watch this play out over Zoom and over Twitter from my living room. I think that's something that's been pretty frustrating. I usually like to travel and to get out into the world and talk to people, and that looks different right now. I think a lot of it we've seen before, and the things that we haven't seen before make me really encouraged. The level of protesting globally makes me really encouraged. I think the things that we've seen before are companies, with really heartfelt statements and maybe like some beautiful orchestral music, declaring their commitment to humanity. Hopefully some of them, walk that talk this time. But other than that, it's been really dizzying, I think. So let's see, we're in mid-October now. And I guess I'm also encouraged that things aren't slowing down. Like, I think the press cycle has really slowed down, but other than that, the work that I'm doing with companies, I know that there's a lot happening internally, and it's not something you can solve within 90 days. So I actually feel really good, at least about the people in my sphere who are continuing to do the work and like doing deep, hard work that doesn't happen overnight, that you can't really make press releases against. How has it been for you? What are you all doing over there?
Well, I mean, it's been an eye opener of a year. I think that everything that's happened, I think, has been a positive catalyst for change, and certainly the BLM movement has played a big part in instigating a lot of change. I think we've had to go through an awful lot of self-reflection and educating ourselves, which has been, for me personally, has been a really, really important thing, and I think certainly for everyone at the company that I work in and lead. So I think the education is an interesting one, because it's not something that we can enforce on everybody, and it's something that you kind of you want and need ideally everybody to take part in and want to take part in and actively embrace. But it's a difficult one. We actually, as a company, we did have a day of reflection to encourage that, and it was out of everything we've done, it was actually probably the most positive feedback that we've had across the whole company as being something that really has made a difference. But yeah, I mean, I think on a personal level, I've certainly learned a lot. It's been It's been good to have time to sit and reflect on certain things about my life and my background, and certainly different types of expanding my understanding, I suppose, of myself and the non-earned privilege that exists, and also many other people around me and within my company as well. And I've certainly learned an awful lot of many different areas of this that I probably didn't really know much about before, to be honest. And that's been a really, really positive thing for me. And that has certainly instigated a change. Actually, it's been quite inspiring to instigate change within me. Yeah, and then on a company level, it's been, you know, it's been fascinating, to be honest, because we've got a wide mix of people across different countries and
yeah. I'm gonna ask if you can kind of scene set for us, like roughly how many people are you, where are you located, like what's the company like? And I think that can help us understand a little more.
For sure, yeah. But I mean, we're a technology company, but we work in advertising as our main, I suppose, the main output of all the technology. And you know, why that's interesting is that you have quite a neurodiverse makeup with that. You have the extreme of engineers, and we have about a third of our company is engineers, a quarter of our company, sorry, and products and analytics probably makes up a third towards a half, actually. And then you have the out and out commercial side, which is completely different types of people, and we have these people, you know, split across, I think, 11 different markets all over the world. And of course, you have slightly different, you know, the more commercial markets like US and New York and London, etc., and Paris. You know, they're more commercial teams, whereas in Kiev, for example, in Ukraine, where we have heavy engineering. So quite a wide makeup, and bringing this all together as a company has been very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm actually very appreciative that we've managed to have this chance and this time to do that, and spend the time to really do that, and actually hear everybody's voices from across the world. And there's quite a range actually of how everyone feels about this topic.
Yeah.
So and you know, it's been a challenging one as well. You know, as a business to, you know, I'm certainly very conscious of being a you know, a white male and coming across in a certain way when discussing this topic. At the same time, you know, I want to be, you know, I want to be visible and, you know, and helping to, you know, helping to enact change within the company. But at the same time, it's also tricky because we want to, it's not just who's in our company, it's also how does everyone feel within the company. And actually, you know, also incredibly aware as well that this is actually a very uncomfortable topic for quite a few people. And you know, we held roundtables the other day to review as a business what we did on that day of reflection, what everyone had thought and learnt and discussed. And quite a few people didn't feel comfortable taking part in that. So again, quite a realization there. So you know, we're only 9.5 years old. You know, I started this company with one other person, and you know, we were as a business, we were in a race to sort of try and find the right talent immediately to fill the immediate need that we had, right?
Yeah.
You know, so I think our needs as a company have changed as we've got bigger, and what we look for has now evolved, and you know, we're working our way through that. Yeah.
So this is so interesting. I have many questions that I want to ask you. Maybe I'll jump to like, what has been the hardest part of this for you? And maybe you can tell us, so it sounds like you had a day of reflection, then you facilitated some smaller roundtables around that. Maybe what else have been like the tentpole things that you've done, and what has been the hardest part of this journey for you as the CEO?
I don't think it's been hard. I think it's been, you know, I think it's, you know, looking within to self-reflect, supporting my team, and evolving how we behave and how we talk and how we support each other, and in changing as a business is something that to me is like part and parcel of what we do anyway. So you know, I care massively about everybody in the company, and I certainly care about how we influence the wider industry as well. So so for me, this is all a positive thing. You know, I think probably the hardest bits are the realization of the things that you as a business, like the naivety that we've shown as leaders, and the mistakes that we've made over the years, that we've really realized that, oh my God, we were just doing things that have just completely gone against what we thought we were doing. You know, we just hadn't thought it through properly.
Yeah.
And you know, we hadn't had the necessary advice, as we've done with many things within the company. We hadn't really had the it's fine to sort of to go through building a company and thinking everything's fine because you live in London and it's a very diverse city and everyone you're around is diverse and you don't think there's any issue. I'm a nice person, people around me are nice, or whatever, so you don't see the wider situation. And then when looking within, we had a number of practices that that have really been bad for creating a diverse workforce, and that's been interesting. And I think we still have issues as well as a company. When you look at it, it looks like it's quite diverse, but then you actually look at it departmentally, and there's real issues there still that we've now got to unravel because of a lot of the things that we've done that have made them not very diverse, over the years. Yeah. So that there's been but at the same time, ultimately we want to own our own change and we want to share our journey, and hopefully people will hopefully we will see change within our company from that. We'll have a more comfortable culture within the company, and I hope that other companies and we'll see some of the changes that we've done, and take inspiration from that. However, I'm extremely keen to make sure that everything that we're doing is not some sort of external PR visibility or anything for our own corporate gain in that sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's I really like the piece that you said there about how it varies departmentally. I think a lot of people that I talk to who do actually, when you take their business overall and you don't look at it by level and you don't look at it by location and you don't look at it by department, the businesses that I've worked with that actually have pretty good representation numbers from like a racial demographic standpoint, once you start asking those questions, you'll reveal different pictures. And it's funny because in the consulting work that I've been doing, I work with the leadership team, but then also interview the employees. And I think that lands as well. People are like, well, if you are this type of person, you only get to do these types of jobs. And I'll just make up an example, but like if you're a woman, you can either do marketing or HR, but you can't do anything other than that. There was a great talk, I think it was Culture Summit last year. Aubrey Blanche, who's at Culture Amp now, was at Atlassian then, and really talked about this element of balanced teams and approaching everything from a team level, which I think is a really great way to make sure, like all throughout the company, you're kind of living up to those values and you're empowering leaders of teams. And not only just holding like top leadership accountable to making those changes. I think another thing that has been different in the conversations I've had over the past few months is, and you touched on this a little bit, which is we're not necessarily trying to change individual behavior, like just getting people to be 10% nicer to each other, or just getting, people to get along with each other a little better. But really there is this understanding that, hey, we said we wanted, an inclusive company, or we said we wanted to be diverse, or we said we wanted everyone to feel good at work. And now we're realizing that some of the things that we're doing, are not designed to facilitate those outcomes. And it's not through, any kind of ill intention, but it's like, the more questions you ask, the more you learn, the more you know. I don't know if there's like any example that you could share with us, or it could even be fictitious, but I think it would be cool to hear, from a CEO's perspective, kind of what are some of the questions you're asking, or systems that you're looking at, or places that you're thinking about.
Well, I think we've done a lot of things that have been, unhelpful. Probably one of the biggest things has been a referral scheme within the company, and we were very much, like I said, trying to hit a hiring plan as fast as possible. Yeah. And I think we've still got issues here with this in our commercial teams. There's we've tended to hire the same sort of people over and over again. So having a referral scheme where people are offered $1,000 or whatever to refer their friend, and of course, as a startup founder, you're thinking, all right, this is brilliant because they might be able to bring their friend, and and this will save us 20%, 25% recruitment fees, etc. And then you realize later that, well, holy shit, we got 60 white middle class, the people from the same area of just outside London, as a sales team, for example. And I'm not saying it's quite that bad, but it's it's certainly, something that is, it needs to be evolving as a business for us, and we've got to have all sorts of different ways that we can do that, and there are many different ways that we can do that, and ranging from the interview process and changing the way we do that. I think the other area that's quite interesting is really understanding a little bit more about everybody's unconscious bias that exists across the business, and how can we evolve the way that we ask questions and the way that we interview people from the start. So taking out people's names, for example, and from the CV initially, which is something that we're putting in place, and that's something that we hope will change unconscious bias that we know actually already exists within our company, and it does, it simply does, and that's something that we want to embrace that change. And I think there's many different things. I think one of the other things that is important, I think, is to really gauge more feedback from within the business, and we've done a lot of that to try and get this in place, which is we've incorporated a platform called Office Vibe, which enables us to get a much more anonymous, constant feel of everything that's going on, and pulse of what's going on, how people are feeling within the business. And I think that's certainly really helped, and many other things. I could talk about it all day. Office Vibe, yeah, it's really good. You can get a real-time pulse of almost, integrates with Slack, so that it becomes a sort of effort-free way of having an interactive discussion with everybody in the business all the time. Wow. And so instead of having like a quarterly or a 6-monthly poll that you send out, you have a much more constant constant pulse of it.
Yeah,
but yeah, awesome. There's lots of other things, diversity targets, and another thing that we did as a business, which was probably not the right thing, was to help diversity, was partnering with a certain university where everybody at that university is a certain, has a certain type of skill set and is from a similar type of area. And that's something that can actively be changed to create a different flow of people coming into the business, and that's quite an easy thing to do, and a really powerful thing to do, the way you can suddenly start to embrace people from totally different backgrounds. And yeah, certainly that's something that we're doing. We've partnered with multiple different 2020 Change here in London and Brixton Finishing School.
Nice. Are there things that your current non-white staff have been telling you that have been making you rethink, like, just how you're doing things internally? I'm always curious to hear that, and I don't know if it's like from a policy perspective or from a culture perspective, but I also think that's like, if recruiting's the first half, then the second half is, okay, once you're here, what type of experience are you having?
Yeah, I think so. And I think we have we've set up safe spaces, so that, and we have a task force where everybody, we've given access to everybody within the business to be able to have confidential discussions. And there's certainly, I think, just first of all, just sort of being able to have that layer of support has unearthed some things as well for us as leaders within the business that perhaps we didn't quite realize, and that's a positive thing. We haven't had, it's a difficult one, because often when people, it's difficult to truly know, because, not everybody is vocal. Not everybody is, wanting to talk about this kind of thing. And that is the side where I feel like I don't know yet fully. I don't know how to fully uncrack that, how to crack that. I mean, it'd be great to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I think, so one of the discussions that I had last week was around, I guess, it's great to see businesses and to see leaders make commitments to doing better, to being more inclusive, to hiring differently than they have in the past. But I think, if I think back to my experiences as an employee, I've been through unconscious bias training and diversity training and all of that. And I think being at a company who is not perfect, because none of them are, but instead of focusing on acknowledging or asking the ways that they're not perfect, is going forward by like just training the hell out of everyone and telling you what you can and can't do from here on out. I think there's a piece of me that definitely feels like, well, you've got a little trust to earn, or you've got a little safety to earn, which is, and again, speaking from my experiences only, but it's, I've been in this place for a while and I've seen whatever I've seen, and I feel like I have a really good read on the people and the culture and what's allowed here and what's not. And if that's been happening all day, but then today on Monday, you're going to tell me you're a different company, I'm not going to dive in and say, oh, thank goodness we're different now. Let me tell you all of these things that I need you to fix, or the problems that I've had with people who are in high levels, or with people responsible for my career. I think, it's through it's through dedicated action, it's through consistency, and it's through, I think, maintaining the dialogue and the level of curiosity and openness that we can really earn that feeling of safety. But I also think, there are ways to get it anonymously, and sometimes it hurts to read those results. It's a little difficult because you can't follow up. You can't say, like, who said that? What do they mean? But it's a starting place. So I think it's, and also the most important thing is when you get feedback, whether it's anonymous or not, you really then have to show that you made an action with that feedback. I've been in a lot of places as well that'll do a survey or do a town hall and hear all of these things, and then they'll kind of move on with their job and not draw the line to how they're addressing that. And that's a way that you kind of destroy trust. So I think it's I think it's a relationship. It's a road of, showing through your actions that this is a safe space, or that we do want to hear from you, or we are committed. So it's kind of tricky. I know we're running up on time here, so I have two more questions for you. One is, what is your ultimate goal? Like, what's your biggest target that will make you feel like you've succeeded? And the second question is, what is the reason that you're doing the work? Like, what do you tell your employees is the reason?
Well, one of the first thing is less actually really around me telling our employees. It's we've actually we've really embraced doing this together as a team. And the first thing we did was the first thing we've done is set up a task force, which is people from all over the group, from all countries, to be able to people who want to be active in this. And it's a very diverse background of people from all over. And that's what is really, really interesting. And there was a very clear sort of communal goal of what they wanted the mission to be. Ultimately, this is in the pursuit of diversity and inclusion, and it's to empower all voices, and it's to create equal opportunities within the business. And that certainly rings true to what we want to do as founders and as leaders within the company. And it's great to have a task force from within the business that actually is kind of speaking for us, representing the company in that way. So yeah, what do we want from it? Certainly, I think we want to, we honestly believe that the business is going to be a much better off place being richly diverse, from people from all sorts of different backgrounds, whether it's neurodiverse, whether it is having a good gender split, and ethnic diversity as well. So that we believe that, and I think we've got to just bit by bit work through the areas of the company that aren't supporting that. And I think we're also, I'm also now enjoying the fact that we have, we are now a big enough company that we can actually now, have, continual change happening here from all over. And in many ways, we're not faced with the same challenge that we had 8 years ago with a VC breathing down our neck, telling us that we had to hit these numbers day one. And we can actually now focus on more of the core things that are like at the values, like importance of the values of us as people within the company. And I think that's the way we're heading. And I'm certainly excited about what we're going to be able to do. I know that there is going to be an awful lot to still work on. There's going to be many different areas that are going to be not going to be right. But I'm absolutely positive about the things that we can do that will make some change. I've got no doubt that they will make some change, and hopefully that will create a ripple effect that goes beyond our company to the rest of the industry as well.
Nice, fantastic. All right, well, thank you for joining me today. This was a wonderful conversation. I hope people got some good takeaways from it, and good luck, and hope maybe we come back next year and do a follow-up on how it's going.
That'd be great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the measuring the change is going to be an important thing, and seeing how companies can change and can evolve and make a difference here. So I think that the accountability piece that you mentioned is really important with that, and that's going to enable us all to make sure that we don't just talk about it 1 minute and forget about it the next. And I'd love to do this again next year to see how it's going.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. See you later.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our panel on fixing social media. My name is Tim. I'm a senior reporter at VideoWeek. And for this panel, we're essentially, it's been motivated quite heavily, obviously, by the Facebook boycott that we've seen over the summer. And I think what was quite interesting about the Facebook boycott compared to other instances where brands have withdrawn spend from social platforms is that this wasn't like with the YouTube brand safety crisis, where it was essentially, something that YouTube didn't want to happen. It was sort of messing up in their content checking systems. And it was a mistake that YouTube would have kind of accepted was wrong. The Facebook boycott was more about a policy that Facebook chose to have. And so the fact that brands boycotted the platform because of that shows that there's an increasing awareness that brands have the ability to affect social platforms policies and that they maybe even have a responsibility to do that. So to discuss that today, we've got Harriet from Conscious Advertising Network and Amy from Good Loop, and we're just going to crack straight on into it. So I guess the first question would just be, obviously, social media platforms are all different, and we saw quite different responses to what was going on over the summer, around, for example, President Trump's comments. Twitter was quicker to hide those, Facebook let them stand. So, they're not all the same. But are there any specific areas where we can pick out maybe social platforms tend to struggle more when it comes to sort of ethics and responsibility?
Well, I think, I think that's a really good question. I think that the social platforms have got an incredibly tough job to kind of look at not only look at what's on there and kind of crack through it, but also to kind of make decisions. I know the human rights community, for example, find defining hate speech extremely hard. The UN has got guidelines around how you identify hate speech and what it constitutes. And they also have guidance around how you police hate speech and also uphold freedom of speech. So, as people that work in tech and advertising, I think we should always defer to those institutions who know how to do this and know how to do this well. And I think it's really tough for the platforms, but I think if they engage with the right communities of people and the right expertise, that becomes easier, because let's be honest, you or I aren't qualified to make decisions about kind of human rights issues in Myanmar or elsewhere, for example.
Yeah. Amy, are there any points that you think the places where the social platforms tend to struggle?
Well, I think it always comes down to this key question of whether they're a media company or not, and you can debate it either way. And I think it is a really complex issue. But ultimately, where Facebook and other social platforms differ from traditional media outlets is that the mechanisms they have built enable the spreading of misinformation, where traditional media platforms are paid journalists who have to, research and quantify and validate their claims. So there's not the same level of scrutiny, and I think that's where there is a little bit more of a black and white, where perhaps they're not creating the content on the platforms, they're certainly creating the structures that enable hate and misinformation to spread. And so I think that's a really key area that obviously caught the attention of thousands of brands over the summer with the boycott, is this idea of policing misinformation, of protecting their users, and just adopting more civic responsibility for the billions of people that trust those platforms.
Yeah, obviously this is like where a lot of the thorniness comes up, I guess, is that people of certain political leanings are suggesting that they're actually going too far in censoring anything or hiding any information. So it's definitely been sort of brought up as a difficult line to tread. So like, as I say, it's been quite apparent over the summer that a lot of brands are seeing this as their responsibility. But, both of you talked to brands about, I guess, the ethics of where they're choosing to spend their media pounds. So if you're sort of talking to a brand about the ethics behind their media spend, and they say to you, why should I care? I'm just buying ads. It's not my responsibility what Facebook's policies on hate speech are. What would you say to them? Why should brands sort of see this as their responsibility?
So I would say there's three key areas that should drive this decision. The first, and perhaps like the most important one, is there's a business imperative. When you're talking to these big brands, that you have to help them make decisions which make business sense, because that's how you can get those decisions scaled across the business. And from a pure business perspective, there's so many studies that show when brands are entrusted in safe environments that advertising is more effective. The IAS did a huge study on this, their ad adjacency study, and they were looking at how consumers find and consume content around COVID and this incredibly scary, uncertain time. The amount of trust that people put in named news sites is really impacting brands. The IAS study found that 41% more engagement on trusted news sites when it was on premium platforms. So there's just a pure business case of clean up these platforms, you'll create a more trusted environment and your ads will perform better. There's also a responsibility case, the idea of ad dollars being the fuel in this engine and our demand shaping the market, and so really taking that seriously. And then the third area would be, in my opinion, pride. Like, we all want to work in an industry we're proud of. We all want to work in an industry that's good for society. Joy Howard, she's the CMO of Dashlane, one of the first brands to announce that they were boycotting Facebook. And she had this fantastic quote as to when she was asked why Dashlane were going to boycott. And she said, I've been buying advertising for millions of years, but until recently, I've been proud of the result and I'm not proud anymore. And that to me just summed it up perfectly. So yeah, I would say it's about business imperative, it's about business responsibility, and it's about personal pride.
I completely agree with everything Amy's just said, and I think we live in an age where consumers and kind of the wider public are more kind of, I think, more skeptical of the claims that brands make and demand more consistency in between what they say and what they actually do. So, for example, we at the Conscious Advertising Network, we talk about this idea that advertising funds the internet, and with that great power comes great responsibility. So actually, if like Amy said, if we have a healthier internet, in general, then our advertising is going to be more trusted and more effective. And I also think when brands have espoused brand values, if they're or charities, because charities advertise as well, if their media spend is working against their charitable intentions, then we've got a real problem there. So I think in order to live up to those values that brands espouse, they have to consider their media spend. And you know, what was it? $330 billion was spent on digital advertising last year. If we know that even a tiny proportion of that is funding hate speech, is funding misinformation, then you know we've got a real problem. And I think it is a collective responsibility to sort that out. And you know, I would say that this problem is bigger than just one platform. If we look at the Global Disinformation Index, kind of looks at kind of misinformation across both platforms and the open web. And we find again and again that both hate and disinformation have a business model through advertising. So if I have, if I have some extremist ideology, I can set up a website, kind of monetize that website through advertising and make a living off of it. And so, with as I said, we've got to wake up to that, and we've got to make sure that we implement advertising strategies that are cutting the funding model for this kind of information.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the point you both raised about sort of consistency in terms of. I think there's a good argument for brands that care about this stuff to get off the fence if that's where they're sat, because we saw, for example, in brand response to the Black Lives Matter movement earlier this year, some brands where it's the first time they've ever done anything, there's an element of great that you're doing something, but we wish you'd been doing this earlier, and it's the same with this, I guess, where if you really believe in these things, then now is probably the time to take action to have that consistency. But I mean, one thing around social is that, as we've already acknowledged, it is quite tricky to navigate, because you've got to make calls on big questions like what constitutes hate speech, what is sort of overstepping the line in terms of censorship. So Harriet, you've already mentioned quite a few resources and places that brands could turn to, but like on a general level, like if a brand comes to you and says, like, we don't even know where to begin to make these sorts of judgments, where would you point them to help them sort of navigate making these decisions?
Yes, gosh. So I mean, obviously this is a hugely I think complex and thorny issue. One person, I mean, I think, and it's really important that kind of we protect things like free speech here. And what basically kind of what we tried to do, this is the knotty problem that we set ourselves when we decided that we needed to have a hate speech and kind of misinformation section within the conscious advertising network. And what we did was engage civil society organizations that were experts in human rights and who understood these kind of issues. And then we essentially created a working group with advertisers as well, and they created our kind of hate speech manifesto. So that hate speech manifesto points people to documentation published by the UN. And there are certain red lines, things like kind of dehumanizing language. So if you're calling a group of people, kind of hate terms and things like rats or cockroaches, then that's a really, really clear red line. But I know that, and so this manifesto essentially points people to existing legislation from institutions who've done a lot of work around this. And I think that kind of direction can be super helpful, because we're not human rights experts as advertisers, but there are people out there that are, and we can draw on that information and that knowledge to make better decisions.
So what do you both think constitutes, if you're a brand and you've decided you care and you do want to take action, what does that look like? Is pausing or completely pulling spend from social platforms, either specific social platforms or just social generally? Is that the answer, and saying, we're holding off spend until these policies get changed? Should you be leaving social platforms completely and deactivating your accounts? What do you think effective action looks like?
Gosh, well, I mean, as I said, like this is so much bigger than a single platform. This is like your entire media spend. In there, some of that advertising cash is going to be going somewhere it shouldn't be, and you probably don't want it to be. So, I mean, I think this is about kind of looking at your kind of, I think, thinking about your media spend as an investment in the internet you want to see. So, what do you want to fund? Is that really quality, great journalism? is that fantastic cat videos, whatever that is, that should be your inclusion list. And then there's a long tail of the internet as well, which, as I said, some of that is kind of based around creating a business model for hate and misinformation. We need to get rid of that and defund those kind of dodgy sites. And I think stop thinking about hitting the numbers when you do that. And then I think there are also great ways of kind of experimenting with your media spend and working out what's effective. So obviously Good Loop is a fantastic example of this. There's networks like Brand Advance, which look at funding kind of diverse media and making sure that media spend is getting to places which might be defunded through kind of traditional block listing techniques. I think 73% of LGBTQ plus media is rendered unmonetizable through block listing. And really just thinking about actually how can we get to our audience and speak to our audience in places that we might have not considered before. And I think if you do all of those things, if you audit your media spend and think bigger about what you want to fund as well as what you want to defund, then I think a more holistic solution is there.
Yeah, and Tim, you asked what actions should a brand take? And I was thinking about this before the call. I was looking at a few examples of brands that have taken action. And obviously there are the 1,000 brands that joined the boycott, and that was a very powerful action. It was powerful symbolically. It got us challenging this sort of basic assumption that Facebook is the go-to platform to connect with consumers. It got us thinking more creatively, gave us a whole month where we could use our money in different ways and see that it's an important but only one piece of a much bigger media landscape. And I think the first point I would make is that action is the thing we should be focused on. That Hotjar, who are they're a behavioral analytics company, they're a tech company. They were used by the Trump campaign to basically they were using their platform to encourage people to vote for Trump, and they have recently blocked President Trump and the Republican Party from promoting the re-election campaign. And when interviewed about that, I thought it was really interesting. The CTO gave a statement, and he said that the reason they did something is to choose not to do something was in itself an action. We are at a point now where not doing anything is also an action. So that would be my first point, would be don't be afraid of action, because we've all got to take action. There is no standing still anymore. And I totally agree with what Harriet's saying. I think there's two layers to this. I think step one is stop funding hate. Stop putting your ads and your ad money into things that are negative. And so a big part of that is things like making sure that your block lists are, really carefully managing climate change denial or Holocaust denial. Those are some really important things to never ever fund without ad money. And also the Conscious Advertising Network have a really helpful manifesto selection that just basically gets you the real hygiene factors of how the advertising industry can do better across everything from child protection through to consent. It's a super helpful starting point for not funding negativity. And then once you've cleaned up sort of the base level of not funding bad, then step two is fund good. Fund the things that actively promote your brand values. What is it your brand stands for, and how can you amplify that through the money you spend on your media, which is 90% of your brand's budget. So it's a really important part of putting your money where your mouth is when it comes to your values. And I love what Chris is doing with Brand Advance. Their diverse network is a fantastic example of putting your money into the most unheard voices who are often the most affected by hate speech and misinformation. So it's a lovely way to kind of balance that, and also work with Good Loop, obviously. But yeah, I think stop funding hate, start funding good, and don't be afraid of action.
You've both said that that this is more than just about changing the social platforms, and that there are really good arguments for brands caring about where their media spend goes generally, and like you say, the good things it's funding as well as the bad things that you don't want to fund. But when it comes to sort of bringing about change from the social platforms, I think one of the problems that some people see is that when it comes to actually denting the revenues of a company like Facebook, it can be tricky because they get so much money from small businesses and small local business that uses Facebook's hyper local targeting solutions, and are pretty reliant on those, might feel less, inclined to take part in those sorts of boycotts. But I guess, what would your response to that? Why should brands like not be dissuaded by that? Do you think Facebook is still listening, despite the fact that it's not necessarily, going to have a massive impact on their immediate revenues?
Yeah, so I actually think that it's quite a negative spin, because there has been some huge impacts for Facebook. And, as much as they like to make it seem like, oh, it didn't affect them at all, P&G, which is their top spender, went from spending £14 million a day to £40,000 a day. So, their top spender globally has slashed their budget. And that budget that used to just flow into to Facebook as default is now being used more creatively, is now being used in different ways. And so it's given us all as an industry a moment of pause and a moment to think, what is the appropriate amount of our budget to spend on Facebook, and how can we diversify? And that is something that has very meaningfully affected Facebook. I mean, just recently they've announced that they're going to ban any content that denies the Holocaust, and that is an absolute U-turn from what they said 2 years ago. And they've not explicitly linked it to the boycott, but the timing is pretty convenient. And I think it's creating a much more sort of reflective approach from these platforms, as they see that this is really important to huge parts of their customer base.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think also, like, what we want to be aiming for is for ethics by design in these platforms. And if your advertisers, the people that you rely on for your business, are saying to you, we need this, we want this, we want this to be just the way that things are done, then change happens. And that's, that's a beautiful thing. So, if, I'm sure TikTok are looking at what's happening to Facebook and adapting. And I'm sure that the next big platform is going to be doing the same. Or at least, when advertisers start to have conversations with them, hopefully they'll be asking questions and saying, what's your policy on this? What do you do around this? And I think that's how change happens, when we look at something and then we kind of embed it within just the way that things are done. And so I think every time there's collective action, every time a brand stands up and says, we want something different and this is why, I think it continues the conversation. And yes, fine, if you're a tiny mom and pop business in a small town and your spend on Facebook is tiny, you might feel kind of hamstrung by the system, but I think that system is changing, and I think that's a really, really powerful thing. And I really look forward to this just being sorted, because I think it will change. We're living through turbulent times, and I think this is playing, a big role in it, and I look forward to that changing.
I guess the last question would just be, we'll have quite a few agencies in the audience for this, and obviously an agency is in a slightly different position in that they've got to essentially, while they might be convinced themselves, pitch this sort of action to their clients, and clients might say, well, you're going to take us off Facebook? No, thank you. But I know Conscious Advertising Network has just recently signed up Harriet Media Group, so clearly they're on board. How do you talk, both of you, with agencies when they're on board with these sort of ethical approaches to media spend, but they want to know how to sort of advise their clients? How can they do that effectively?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think, brand safety is such a hot topic right now. I think, it's good advice to your clients to be advising to thinking like this, because their advertising is going to be more effective, because you're going to be cutting out some of the long tail that kind of, I think, sometimes gets stirred into to hit the numbers. And also you're investing in the long term in a safer media environment. So, I mean, I think obviously the conversations with clients are tough, but I really think good advice right now is to consider these issues, because they're not going anywhere. They're not going away. Kind of building brands in the long term means being cognizant of this stuff. And we've already seen, 20 years ago, brand values would look very different to today, and the way that brands communicate would look very different to today. And I think that, as I said, this idea that brands have a responsibility beyond simply profit is a big, it is how brands are going to be built in the future. And I think, yeah, sure, these conversations might be tough, and obviously when you're used to have, you know, hitting particular numbers or using particular metrics to think about success, like they can be big scary conversations, but ultimately in the long run this is going to pay off, and it's also, you know, and it's going to manage risk, and your clients' advertising isn't going to be in places that they don't that it shouldn't be, or that they would kind of balk at the idea of it being. So I think, you know, I think these might be tough conversations, but they're so worth having, and you know, hopefully we'll get there.
I would add to that I think many agencies are already huge advocates of this. We work very closely with agencies, and I've been so excited by the amount of new conversations we've had over the summer, where agencies have said, you know, okay, we want to do an all-day workshop on what sustainable media looks like, or, you know, our next big event, the theme is sustainable media investment, or we want to be carbon neutral we want our media plans to be carbon neutral. Like, all of these little questions and ideas are coming out of the woodwork, and the role of an agency is to challenge the client and to be a trusted advisor. And so I think the agencies are really leaning into that, and they are being a very powerful force in changing this. And I would also say, you know, I've spent the last 5 years building a business that's about harnessing ethics as a way to drive effectiveness. And one thing that I've had to get really good at is framing an ethical decision within a commercial context. So always think of it as, what is the business benefit, and how can I frame it within that space to talk about how you're going to drive brand love, how you're going to build trust, how you're going to build loyalty and build customer value. And those things can't be done in a platform that has hateful, unkind cultures. That's just not possible. So thinking about the business benefits of, you know, purpose to drive performance, to drive those metrics that really matter, that's how you get the big businesses on board. And never ever apologize for using commercial metrics as a way to drive meaningful change, because, you know, that's the language that these guys speak.
Yeah, and I think you're right. We have seen a few kind of big examples of the big media agencies launching new initiatives this summer where they're, you know, looking to make meaningful change and like push through meaningful change for the social platforms and for other media platforms. And you've got to think agencies that size are pretty well positioned to have a big impact. That is, I'm afraid, all we've got time for. But I think it's been a really interesting chat, and hopefully those of you in the audience, if you found all this a bit hard to navigate, will have a bit more clarity after this. Thank you very much, Amy and Harriet.
Cheers.
Thank you.